Hi. Greetings from Wisdom Lord Raphael. Before we start, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell icon and don't miss any content. This is the light novel of that time I got reincarnated as a slime. If you haven't watched previous video, I will leave the link on the description box, or you can click here. Let's start. This is Tensura Light Novel Volume 17. Tensura Light Novel. Volume 17. Fragments Across Space-Time. Chapter 3. The Turbulent Days. Masayuki's Coronation. Krishna wasn't the only one who had expressed a desire to change sides. Some of the Imperial Guard have begun to say they want to stay here in Tempest. He could understand why they wanted to stay, so he didn't want to impose on them. But that would mean a decline in their forces, and that's why he had to figure out what to do. Many of their men died in this battle. This was not a matter to be rehashed, since they had it coming, but there was also no reason not to think about how to deal with it. There were only 2 survivors of the single digits, Bonnie and Ju. From now on, however, they would be under the control of Masayuki, acting as his bodyguards. It is more than enough to have Valgrant, but they would be useful for consulting and for other small tasks, which was why they were able to fulfill Masayuki's request. Calgurio intended to take this opportunity to reform the Emperor's Imperial Guard Knights. It would depend on how many survivors there are, but he would not settle for 100. He was going to abolish the hierarchy and stop giving meaning to numbers. A certain amount of strength and loyalty to Emperor are 2 prerequisites, but Calgurio plans to widen the door a bit in the future. He was going to send them in groups of 3 to various provincial cities to fortify the Empire's defense. With 3 men, even if they couldn't compete with the top aggressors, they could buy some time. Ideally, they should be able to respond flexibly, such as by rushing to their aid. There are more than 100 cities in the Empire, so their numbers are not sufficient at this point in time. There are still some provincial armies left intact, so they'd get by for the time being by coordinating with others. At any rate, he was prepared to focus on those who had reached the Sage class. It's tough on us both. Yeah. But it's been strangely rewarding. When Minutes muttered this to himself as he popped his drink, Calgurio nodded his head in agreement. And so, the words spilled out, but they were surprisingly Calgurio's true feelings. The feeling of working for the Empire had brought Calgurio more fulfilling days than when he had only thought about move up in the military. Besides, now that we have heard of His Majesty Rimuru's plans, it is imperative to restore security and political stability to the Empire. If we don't get on board, we will be left behind in the future world. With Rimuru and Masayuki's approval, construction of the railroad begins. Perhaps in less than a few years, they could see a future in which the transportation network would be completed in the Empire. The stories he'd been told at the meeting alone were shuddering, but there was more to the story. And that thing. Plans to control the skies of the world, right? That man is outrageous. I know he said it over drinks, but I'm told he doesn't get drunk. So that means he meant what he said. Zamid seemed to have been inspired by it too, since he volunteered to help. Well, he's more of an engineer than a soldier, so that's what he's really all about. Is it possible to connect countries with a magic train on the ground and mass-produce airspace in the sky to stabilize the sales channels? It's a frightening idea, but it will be realized. After all, the only thing they asked for in compensation for this defeat was airspace rights. And rather than not needing anything else, he even provided a support. How can we refuse them? It doesn't matter, since His Majesty Masayuki approved. What's important is the future. With that said, Calgurio thinks. This country is weird. The remarks of Demon Lord Rimuru, who says that he has an idea, would be put into a feasible plan the very next day, if not within the same day. The plan to mass-produce the airships had been planned from the moment he learned that the Empire owned it, but it was still unusual for them to prepare a development base for it so easily. A floor in the labyrinth has now become a place to improve the airships. Zamid works there happily, and he says every day that this is where heaven was found because he can get as much material as he wants without worrying about the budget. The excitement of being back from the dead seems to have added to that. Calgurio envies Zamid for being so obedient to his own desires, but he can only wish Zamid good luck in maintaining the friendship between Tempest and the Empire. Aside from Zamid, the important things is the future. In Demon Lord Rimuru's vision, it seemed that he would be willing to help with maintenance within the Empire as well. Now that the Empire's power has declined, there was no choice but to take advantage of this. The Empire could provide the labor as well, so he doesn't intend to make it a relationship where they can only rely on them. In that regard, Calgurio thinks very differently from the Western nations. He is an intelligent man capable of making calm judgment as long as he is not blinded by lust. And so, he came to the conclusion that domestic stabilization was the priority when considering what was needed. The empire is not in shambles at present. However, the details of the defeat would undoubtedly unsettle the subjects. A fallen family would see Demon Lord Rimuru as an enemy to be reckoned with. Krishna and others are taking steps to prevent this from happening, but Calgurio must also take action. Also, as Minutes is wary of, the movements of the higher nobles are a cause for concern. If they are to grow, they must welcome the Tempest forces into the empire to ensure that they don't run into the wrong people. There are a lot of problems. That's a big responsibility. Yeah. But Calgurio. What? Don't you think it's His Majesty Rimuru who has it harder than we do? That's true, Calgurio thought. When asked about their plans for future development, they had desperately started to move accordingly. But that's only natural. Restoring their country's security and developing it is not a job that they have been ordered to do. It is a job that they should work hard at every day while wishing for the betterment of their own country. A conflict with aggressors are inevitable in the near future. And yet, they have realized that they feel little concern about it. It's all because they had been given so much to do. Buried in them, the anxiety was dispersed. I see. He just didn't want us to worry. I suppose so, but maybe that's not all there is to it. Maybe His Majesty Rimuru intends to take care of the aggressors on his own. Or maybe he doesn't think of them as much of a problem, but it was bound to be a big deal. And yet Lord Rimuru spoke more about future developments than the aforementioned subject. Calgurio and the Minutes were impressed by his noble imposing attitude. Perhaps it was the same with King Gazelle as well. To Demon Lord Rimuru, aggressors were nothing more than a trivial matter. Was that vanity or genuineness? Minutes thinks it's Rimuru's way of saying he doesn't want Calgurio and the others to be worried. But Calgurio can't help but think the same way as Minutes. If we really want to deal with the aggressors on our own, then we should find something we can do to help. At the very least, we must stop anyone from causing a civil war and dragging us down. Calgurio is ready to go. Calgurio and Minutes left the restaurant after drinking for about an hour. The next day, they left for home after setting up Masayuki as a portable shrine. Back in the imperial capital, Calgurio has a busy day ahead of him. There are some damaged areas around the capital, but there was no need to do anything right now to rebuild. That's because it was going to be done by collaboration with Rimuru and his team. So, the first priority was to reorganize the military. The generals who survived, those who all came back to life, are all back home and have been given a new mission. In any case, the first priority was to keep the peace, and taking into account the report from Krishna, he sent his troops to the unsettled provinces to warn them. Fortunately, the 700,000 soldiers were loyal to Calgurio. Even those who wanted to settle in the monster country were cooperative this time. That was because Demon Lord Rimuru had promised to hire them after the turmoil was over. Well, you can think it over instead of just deciding right away. He gathered the soldiers in the arena and gave a speech. After Rigard had explained the detailed conditions of settlement, Rimuru had told them himself. By the way, Rimuru didn't try to persuade anyone, but he did leave it up to the individual's will, and about 200,000 people who heard his speech were motivated to move on. Aggressor races, huh? I'm going to beat them to a pulp. And, well, the fighting spirit was growing. Although they lost their soul power, their bodies were still altered. Even now, some of them can rival A-ranked players and are a force to be reckoned with. This is how Calgurio wants to somehow stabilize the imperial capital. But here, an even bigger problem arose. The real trouble was the nobles. There was no end to the number of nobles seeking to meet with them, and this was putting a strain on Calgurio's work. Even if he wanted to decline, there were some big names that might be useful in the future. Minutes lobbying and Krishna's persuasion helped, and no major disruptions occurred, but it was certainly a drain on their spirits. Then Demon Lord Rimuru dispatched a helping hand. It was Tensura, the beautiful white, blanc, demon. The first thing Tensura did was deliver a speech to control the people. Completely ignoring the nobles, she appeased the subjects who had not yet come to terms with the shock of defeat. It seemed like a task unsuitable for these fear-mongering demons. However, it wasn't surprising. Demons feed on emotions, so they were perfect for relieving the fear and anxiety of the subjects. I'm surprised. I never thought that the white primordial Tensura Dono, who once tormented the empire, would care so much about the people. Of course. It is my job that I have been given by our king, Rimuru-sama. That's true, but it's more, pardon me, rough, because I didn't expect such measures to be adopted. Calgurio gives his thoughts as he sheds greasy sweat. He regretted it right after he said it, thinking it was too straightforward, but Tensura let it slide without a second thought. We can't let bad publicity get in the way of Rimuru-sama in any unlikely event. We can be cautious, but that wouldn't be as effective. And it's hard to adjust. Eating up all the emotions can have a detrimental effect on you. Calgurio paled in thought, but Tensura would never make such a mistake. She told Moss to control her subordinates, and success was guaranteed. But her words were also true. It is difficult to control people's emotions with moderate methods alone. The deaths of their relatives and the transfer of the throne from Rudra to Masayuki confused the subjects. Not all the sorrow of the subjects has disappeared, and there are still seeds of anxiety and dissatisfaction. In that regard, Calgurio's deployment of security forces in various locations had prevented riots and skirmishes from occurring. If you don't like it, it's easier to kill everyone in your family if you want. Ha, 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 ha. You've got to be kidding me. It's not a joke, Calgurio thought. He knew that the white primordial, Blanc, was trouble. This strengthened his respect for Rimuru, who can control Tensura. The subjects have calmed down to some extent, and fortunately no one was foolish enough to rise up in arms. Relieved at this point, Tensura had the next move in mind. They decided to unveil the new Emperor Masayuki as the quickest and most effective way to provide mental care for the people. The point is, it was a coronation ceremony for him. Tensura thought that, if Masayuki gave a speech on the occasion, his subjects would feel that a new era had arrived. What, me? Is there a problem? No, nothing. He was willing to accept it. There were tears in his eyes, but they were worthless in front of Tensura's smile. Oh my, how dare you make Masayuki cry? Velgrind interrupted. To which Tensura replied flatly. I'm sorry, but I have no taste for such things. Two beautiful women looking at each other with smiles on their faces. Their gazes clash, and a terrible pressure was being exerted. It is mainly Masayuki and Calgurio who suffer the damage. Praying to go back home, Masayuki passes it by. Calgurio overcame the crisis by emptying his mind. Anyway, Masayuki's coronation became a reality. Countless subjects filled the square in front of the imperial castle. Looking down on them, Masayuki stood on a balcony in the upper part of the castle. He came to the empire with Velgrind's transfer, so this is practically his first appearance as the emperor. With his appearance as an emperor, he may seem dignified if he doesn't say anything. At the appointed time, Calgurio delivers a speech. Then minutes, as the new prime minister, gives an explanation. The war was a great defeat. As a result, Rudra, the former emperor, had died. The chosen hero Masayuki was crowned as the new emperor. Masayuki's intercession has established peace with the monster kingdom, and he would seek to improve the relationship between the two sides in the future. Along with this, diplomatic relations have been established with the Dwarven kingdom. That's all for today, hope you guys enjoy it. Please check my other videos. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and hit the notification icon. And don't miss any updates. Thank you for watching.